Good evening, everybody. If anyone can hear me. Hello, hello. Good afternoon, you two, if you can hear me.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. No complaints from me. Thanks for having me at a dinner and learn, I should say.
Forget the dinner at a learn.
I
And
know it's been tough to convince people to just do the learn part, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we would be more than happy to have the food, but it's kind of, since we're doing it virtually, doesn't quite work.
Totally understand. No worries. And for future reference, I'm not sure if you're an architect by chance, by trade, but we're always happy to set up a real lunch and learn with your team too, where we do actually provide the lunch as well.
Okay.
And this is going to be the first time for me presenting to in a forum like this. Is most of the people here going to be, in the construction community, architects, contractors, owner developers?
No, just the opposite. Are you
Okay.
familiar with community boards?
I am a little bit. Excuse me. I'm from Chicago, so I have a little experience, but maybe you could kind of shed some light on it exactly.
Well, community boards in New York City, I mean, they're part of city government, so to speak. They're the closest to the community. And so we are all volunteers and we are appointed by a combination of the borough president and our local city council representatives.
Okay.
So on the committee, I happen to be an architect and planner, but the other members, I think we have three attorneys. We have someone who's into media, we have someone who's an artist. But in the course of projects coming before us, whether it's renovation projects or new construction, they come to us for certain land use approvals, or if it's in a historic district, they, get our support for landmarks preservation. But we also
Sure.
want to get a sense of, particularly in the current environment, energy, efficiency. There was a lot of discussion of, what you can do with passive house where it's appropriate. So
Cool.
it's not people in the profession, but it's people who are interested in the right questions to ask when we are presented with projects.
Love it. That gives me a great idea, and I'll keep that in mind as we go. Typically I'm typically only in front of like contract developer, so I'll keep it go. But the good thing about this passive house initiative is really towards, even if this is going to be your first time hearing about what passive house is, or if you have experience with it already. So we'll start from the very basics, talk about, how it was developed, when it was developed, and then we'll actually kind of start getting to the meat and potatoes of what you'd want to see on a passive project. Things like, an airtight envelope to make sure we're not wasting any type of, heating or cooling on the building, right? And then things like that. And sir, what was your name? I apologize.
Wayne Benjamin.
Wayne Benjamin. Well, Wayne, do you have any experience with passive house maybe previously?
I've gone to a couple of passive house presentations, some of them, fairly in detail. I haven't gone for any of the passive house training or stuff like that, but I am familiar, with the super tight building envelope. The whole idea of having, the more efficient your building envelope is, the less you need to rely on, the mechanical systems to provide the heat and cooling. And I think there are a couple of examples of buildings in Europe where they had power outages, but they didn't feel any, difference in the internal temperature for more than a day.
It's funny you bring that up. I was actually just on site last week visiting a passive project here in Chicago, and someone told me the exact same thing. The power had gone out for a day and they had no change inside of their unit on temperature. And, we're talking in the middle of the winter in Chicago. We're looking at single digits. So I think that's a great example.
Yeah, I think we were talking about something like, in the Netherlands where it gets cold.
Yeah.
So it's the same concept.
Yeah, I've actually been to the Netherlands too. It certainly gets cold, but I'd like to see them try to survive a Chicago winter.
Yes. Well, I've never been to Chicago. I have a grad school buddy who, said, he's from, I think, Indiana, and he was in Chicago standing, waiting for, one of the elevated trains to come, and he had on his, insulated jacket and his long john. He said he felt like he was absolutely naked. The wind was just going through everything.
That's the issue. That is definitely the issue. And right now it is pouring with snow. So I'm hoping that doesn't come your way, because typically I'm kind of like my East Coast colleagues weatherman. I can kind of predict what the weather's coming, and it looks like maybe there's a cold front coming your way in the next 24 hours. So just get
It's
ready.
not that cold, but it is pouring. It's pouring.
It's pouring. That's what it was yesterday for us. Now it's turned into snow, unfortunately.
Yep.
But, hopefully we're in March. Hopefully this is the next, maybe the last or second to last time we see some snowfall. Spring's right around the corner. And, maybe to give everybody peace of mind here too.
Yes?
I guess there's no peace of mind.
Oh,
Oops.
what a perfect
That's
time.
on his own, you have nothing to do
No,
with
that was,
You'll be back.
that was
You'll be
me.
back.
I think I was trying to,
No, there's no way that you could have done that. There's no way. Zoom doesn't have the capability for you to throw somebody on. They have to have an internet connection or touch
You probably
something on
like
their.
press leave or something.
He didn't have to call the weather chat, but he was producing most of it.
It does get cold in Chicago.
well, I see Sam as an attendee. I want to make him a panelist. So
Okay.
I think that was me.
Bring him.
He was showing up as
Oh, so
a,
stop touching stuff, Wayne.
I was trying to promote him, although he was already there, so it was odd. You're
Can
back?
everybody hear me again?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
I could hear and see you, by the way, that whole time, but it took away my camera angle, and it just all of a sudden I was promoted to a panelist and then an attendee and vice versa. So
You
right.
were showing up as, I think, as an attendee, and you should be a panelist. So I was trying to promote you to a panelist, but you were already a panelist, so.
okay,
Anyway,
perfect. Now, the thing I was just talking about, though, everybody kind of build some credibility with everybody here as well. We've been in business as a company close to 20 years, and I would say New York City, hands down our largest market. We now have close to 200 projects alone in your state, and most of which being in New York City. And you're going to see a lot of great examples because a lot of our case studies for today for Passive House are located in New York. So just to kind of give you that peace of mind, we are very local. We do a lot of work where you're at, and we'll have a lot of examples to look at too.
Sounds good.
Is it all new construction?
We do retrofit and new construction. So we do a little bit of both, and we certainly do retrofits on I should say Passive House retrofits as well. And by the way, maybe to continue on that trend of building credibility, I've also been a Passive House tradesperson for 6 years. So a lot of experience on that front too. And actually flew out to New York City to get my certification. I stayed for a week, and we actually even built a small structure to Passive House standards. And once you know it, we used an Intus window as the windows. And we actually even have no affiliation with the Passive House network. I think it just kind of shows how long we've been doing passive projects. Certainly our niche market. And it's actually how we got started here too. Was doing small single family projects almost 20 years ago.
Where did you do the training in New York?
It was in the Bronx. But you are going to test my memory here. I can't remember exactly where I was located, but I believe my teacher's last name was Brennan, if that rings a bell for anyone who's maybe gone through the training.
Was it at like at a college, or was it at someone's office?
It was at somebody's office. So we had like a classroom, and then we had a very large kind of like open industrial area where we actually built that structure to Passive House standards.
Okay.
So it's cool to kind of get hands-on, right? Because I can talk about Windows all day long, but until you're actually starting to install, doing the, weatherproofing, puncture points in your envelope, things like that, it was really cool to get that hands-on experience.
Okay. Let me shift for a second. Hi, Indiana. Do you have an excuse that allows your participation
Yes.
via Zoom to count towards quorum?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then we have quorum.
Yeah, let's go.
Hey.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
And then there's
Oh,
Jim,
Jim too.
And then there's Jim.
counts.
your new colored sweater.
So let me make
A
sure we
t-shirt.
got you straight. So it is 7:02 PM. I want to welcome everyone to the March meeting of the Manhattan Community Board 12 Land Use Meeting. I'm Wayne Benjamin. I chair the committee, and I'd like to have my fellow committee members introduce themselves. And starting at my right, who's chewing?
Hi, my name is Daniel. I also serve on the Parks and Cultural Affairs. I'm an artist and I live in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Daniel. And to my left,
Vivian Duquette, I'm a public member for many years of this committee, and I live in Washington Heights.
I'm Heidi Guzman. I am the assistant chair of this committee, and I also serve on the Health and Environment Committee, and I also live in Washington Heights.
thank you. Indiana,
Hello, I'm Indiana Porta, and I serve on this committee and on Health and Human Services.
thank you. Jim,
I'm Jim Berlin. I'm also on the Traffic and Transportation Committee, and I'm the board parliamentarian.
thank you all. We have three presentations for this evening, but before we get into that, although we had a little preview of one of them, just for an update for my fellow committee members. A couple months ago, we had a presentation by a group that responded to the survey that was released by CB12 and the Historic Districts Council. And this was the group that was looking at a Fort Washington historic district. And that was an initial meeting. They were just, beginning to do the homework. I received a heads up from one of the committee members that the Fort Washington Historic District is going to be named, or has been named, one of the 6 to celebrate
That's great.
by the Historic Districts Council. And the 6 to Celebrate is a program by which, I think over the course of a year, the Historic Districts Council will provide resources to the group to further, their investigation into, the merits of designation, and hopefully leading to a submission to the Landmarks Preservation Commission. So that's, I think, something we're all glad to hear. We want to have more feedback directly from the community on what areas they would like to see considered. And, in this case, I think this was the single largest group of people, and it's good to see that it's moving forward and they're getting support from, the Historic Districts Council, which has named sections of Washington Heights and Inwood in the past as part of Six to Celebrate. I believe in their inaugural year, Inwood was.
No, we got it for 158th Street. Matthew and I got it. It's inaugural year, that's right. It was
But-
Pat, it was
yeah,
Pat Courtney.
That was up in Inwood.
Right,
Um,
and then we got it.
Yes, so that's great. So we have, as I mentioned, 3 presentations, 2 of which pertain to something that the committee discussed a few months ago, and that's sustainability and energy efficiency. And we're going to look at it from 2 different directions. But first, we have a briefing from the City Planning Commission. And this is on the New York City Industrial Plan. And this is the beginning of a dialogue because the plan is not yet fully developed and fleshed out. But this is, I guess, to give us a heads up of what it will entail and what we can expect as next steps. So with that, we have a couple of representatives with us from City Planning. We have Audrey Watts, who's been with us many times, and we have Ali Soong.
Yeah.
Who will take the lead in this presentation?
Chelsea and I will be giving the presentation, and then Audrey is here as your normal representative.
Okay, well,
Hi,
the
everyone.
floor is yours.
All right. I'll be sharing the presentation. Just give me one moment to get that pulled up.
Oh, whether the recording stopped.
I think that was on their side.
Oh.
You can probably just start it again.
Hold on one moment. Sorry.
Audrey, do you want one of us to share it? Or-
Yeah, that might be best. I'm sorry. My computer is not liking the share.
All good.
Okay.
Let me see. if
Sorry
I
about
can-
that.
Not a problem.
One second. Sorry. Let me get it.
The rain that's missing everything.
Can you
Yes,
see my sc- Can you see the
Yes.
Yes,
Sorry.
you're loading in, yes.
Sweet.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, thanks, Ali and Audrey. Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Evans, and we're here on behalf of the New York City Department of City Planning to present on the New York City Industrial Plan. This plan was born out of a piece of legislation known as Local Law 172 of 2023, which was passed by the City Council in November 2023, which requires the Departments of City Planning and Small Business Services, along with New York City Economic Development Corporation, to develop a citywide industrial development plan. So historically, New York City was an industrial powerhouse, and industrial activity was a major driver of its development as a global maritime and industrial center. 70 years ago, half of all jobs, or about 1.8 million jobs in total in the city, were in the industrial sector. Today, the industrial economy is much smaller, but it's also much more diverse, and it's less concentrated in historically industrial areas. So why is industry important? Today, New York City's industrial economy accounts for 550,000 jobs, or about 15% of the city's total private sector jobs. The industrial economy is broad and it's inclusive of a wide range of subsectors. And we've framed the 3 primary subsectors as moving, making, and maintaining. There are 251,000 jobs in the moving sector. Those are jobs that entail moving goods like packages or food. There are 255,000 jobs in the making sector. And when we say making, we're talking about things like manufacturing and construction, and so the making of goods or buildings. And then in the maintaining sector, there are 36,000 jobs. Jobs in the maintaining sector might entail working for a utility company or repairing cars. And then we'll talk really quickly about some of the challenges that industry in New York City faces today. So based on the engagement and research that we've done thus far, there's 6 major challenges that have become clear to us. One of which is that there is a significant demand for modern and affordable industrial space, and finding that space is difficult. We also hear that for a range of reasons that the cost of doing business in New York City is high. Other challenges are that the nature of industrial activity is changing, and so is the required skill set of workers. Public realm conditions are often problematic. This means issues like insufficient lighting, dumping of trash, perceptions of safety, and illegal parking. Traffic congestion and roadway conditions are also cited as an issue. And finally, people have expressed worry about harmful climate impacts like storms, urban heat island, and flooding. So what the city has done so far, the city has done several reports on sectoral and geographically specific parts of the industrial economy. These reports have provided recommendations at a neighborhood or issue-specific level, but never before at an all-encompassing citywide level. And I'm going to pass it over to Allie to talk a little bit about the citywide level that we're working on now.
Yeah, so this industrial plan that we're now working on is the first citywide industrial development plan in New York City's history. Through the industrial plan, we hope to guide the industrial sector's growth, ensure that New York City remains a good place for industrial businesses and workers, and that we can allow industrial and non-industrial communities to better coexist with each other. Currently, we're in a learning stage in the plan development. We're talking to community boards, stakeholders, industrial businesses, experts, and community members who have an interest in the industrial economy. This plan is being developed upon guidance from previous planning efforts and requirements laid out in the council legislation. We are to complete this plan by the end of 2025 and then repeat production of the plan every 8 years in the future. This report will include a data book on land use conditions and development patterns in industrial areas, as well as economic trends, conditions, and changes within the industrial economy. This product will include both research product and feedback from industrial stakeholders and the community. The plan requires that we define primary industrial areas, identifying parts of the city that are best suited for continued future industrial use, but these are not zoning districts, and the plan is neither a ULURP action nor a rezoning, just as a clarification. Additionally, we are to make recommendations on ways to improve or expand existing initiatives, programs, land use tools, and other policies where possible. With that, our hope is that we can work together on this plan to integrate industry into the fabric of our city, protect our industrial spaces, and plan for a future that's both economically vibrant and sustainable. So we're planning to host an info session at a yet to be determined date in April. Once the date is set, we'll be contacting the district manager and asking all who are interested to attend. We also have a project website that we encourage you to visit, which has more materials and a background on the plan. There's also a survey for industrial businesses and anyone else who's interested to share their thoughts with us on the industrial plan and what they'd like to see included. So thank you so much for your time. As was mentioned at the beginning, this is just the beginning of this process, and we're going to continue working on it. And if you have any questions now, we can see if we have the answers to them at this point, or we can give those questions to the project team for the industrial plan and try and get back to you about it.
I have one request and one question. The one request is, can you share this presentation with me so that we have it for record? And if there are other committees in addition to land use that, like business development that, probably could review this and, make use of it. So I'd just like to have it, for a resource. The question is, this plan is not a ULURP or rezoning, but I guess the question is, what do you see as the actions coming out of the plan? And are actions such as ULURPs or rezonings or changes to existing, land use patterns and designations a possible outcome of the plan? I mean, having a plan is fine, but I mean, what is it intended to achieve?
Well, the plan, as was mentioned, is really coming out of this council legislation, which is asking DCP and SBS to look at the city holistically and looking at the industrial economy across the city and looking also at like, where are there areas where industry is really thriving? Where are there areas where industry needs support? And part of what we're doing is establishing these primary industrial areas to see where industry exists and is working well. So in that way, it's for the primary industrial areas, those are areas we would want to protect as industrial rather than maybe rezoning them away from industrial. But as the plan is developed, that might be a sort of outcome of some of these primary industrial areas, depending on how the plan develops. But I don't think that the plan itself, again, is not a rezoning and not a ULURP action. And I don't know if we can say for certain that any particular rezonings would come out of it, because it's definitely mostly about thinking about areas where industry is working. But then also we have some additional tools in zoning that are new that could be applicable potentially in certain areas, but we just don't know exactly where that would go. Sorry, I'm speaking about parts of the plan that we don't necessarily know where it would go. But basically, yeah, it's not a zoning action, and there's not plans to rezone. In the plan, it's more just setting goals for the city's industrial sector, if that makes sense. And also not just zoning, but also, yeah, thinking about where other initiatives might be helpful for certain industrial areas in the city.
Okay, I mean, I understand that it's early in the process and answers to the question I pose may be more forthcoming later. But I just want to raise something that I think I raised with Audrey via email. In Community District 12, Washington Heights at Inwood, the Inwood Train Yard and some other sites that are controlled by, I guess, utilities or city agencies have been identified as these primary industrial sites. And they, I think, all happen to be within the geographic area that was subject to the Inwood rezoning. And I think in the Inwood rezoning, many of those sites had their zoning classification changed from manufacturing to something that would allow a mixture of developments. And so the question then becomes, how does or eventually how will the New York City Industrial Plan and the Inwood rezoning work with or against each other?
I think that we can't really answer that very specifically now, but the project team is looking at the land use context of all the areas that we're looking at. So definitely the Inwood rezoning will be studied along with the industrial plan, or like it will be in the context of the Inwood rezoning that we're thinking about the plan. And again, the industrial plan won't rezone anything. And part of what the industrial plan is also doing is looking at areas where industry and other uses could mix to some extent, but what kind of support would be needed, or areas where things are more primarily industrial. So all of those things are being looked at, but nothing has really been determined yet.
And
Any
yeah, and I think sorry, I'll just jump onto that really quickly. I think we had discussed via email that those sites that you mentioned were pulled in sort of a preliminary analysis. A lot of M zone clusters in the city that have important uses on them now were pulled in that initial research that we did. So we'll know, by July, when the plan is, the draft plan is complete and public, what those primary industrial areas are. And those are saying that, when you're designated as such, that's saying that this is an important area in the city that we want to encourage. We want to encourage industrial uses here, and we want to, preserve what is currently there. But we'll know, we can get back to you on like the specific interactions between the Inwood rezoning and the industrial plan.
Thank you. Vivian, did you?
I just wondered whether it still is, most of what you're doing is going to end up in the outer boroughs, as Manhattan, the traditional industrial areas already have become residential, and there's such a push for additional housing.
A lot of there probably will be more of these primary industrial areas in the outer boroughs than in Manhattan, just based on the existing land use. So I think that that's accurate, but we're looking at the whole city to see where these areas might be identified.
Jim?
Thank you. This may have been mentioned before, but it sounds like, what you're trying to do is preserve industrial areas. And of course, part of the Inwood rezoning was originally a manufacturing district, and it was decided by our city fathers that, people should live there instead, which, that's perfectly reasonable. But it's interesting that, now they're sort of trying to reverse the trend, it sounds like.
I think that what we're looking to do is have a balance in the city, because we know that residential is important for a healthy city, but also, as sort of Chelsea's intro gave, industrial uses historically have been really important in the city. And I think that the council legislation is meant so that we can look at the city holistically, see where industry fits in, and make sure that we have that as a goal, as well as residential, as well as all the other things that we're working on to make sure that the city works in a holistic way.
Any further questions, either in person or online?
I just think it's interesting. That like, just like in our area, we don't have that many manufacturing zone, and I wonder how like that whole plan will fit into our neighborhood, and it will be kind of like a question of like, oh, should we develop more industry that actually does like get jobs like for people and all that stuff, and I think a lot of those sites is like how you said, like part of that whole inward rezoning too. And one of the biggest land masses, it is the MTA site where it is designated as like manufacture and whatnot, and then all the other ones are like smaller buildings. Just interesting to see like what's gonna come out of this whole thing. So.
Whose hand do I see? Indiana.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if you happen to know if our council member had voted in support of this legislation requiring the study, and what kind of engagement you might envision having with our council members while you're drafting the report? Afterwards, is there going to be sort of I believe you mentioned maybe like an initial draft? Is that something that we would get to see before it's publicly circulated? Are you, kind of like, what is the check-in again with us as a board as well as with the council member? Thank you.
Yeah, so, oh, sorry. Chelsea, did you want to say? Oh, well, I just that I'm not sure if your council member voted in favor of the legislation. I'm not sure about that, but DCP has been working closely with the council as we're developing this plan, as well as with other agencies, including SBS and EDC, which were included in the legislation, and then also with the Department of Transportation and the Department of Environmental Protection, the Mayor's Office for Climate and Environmental Justice, and the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, as well as others. So we are working with other city agencies and with the council on this plan. And then as for the draft plan, that will be released in July, and then it will go through a period of public review until the final plan is released at the end of 2025, so sometime around December. So there will be a pretty substantial period after the draft plan has been released for us to revise and change things.
My understanding is this industrial plan is an outgrowth of one of the 20 million local laws that was passed. I think this is local law 172. Jamila's online, she may know better, but I think Councilmember De La Rosa co-sponsored that local law.
I can also assist the board and Ally and Chelsea in finding out, the process and where Councilmember De La Rosa voted and what her role was in it. So just let me know.
Actually, we have Jose Torrijos from the Department of City Planning in chat, and he says that's correct. And I guess he's responding to the comment that the council member co-sponsored it. Is that what you're saying?
Hi, this is Jamila.
That is
Hi,
correct.
Jamila.
So it was introduced by De La Rosa and also Abreu in terms of the local law. And I also basically kind of like what the actual local law says in case you guys are curious about that.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Hi, Jamila.
Hi, I wasn't able to hear the question. I just heard the council member.
The question was, did the council member vote in favor of this local law? And I said, based on the information that I received, she co-sponsored it. And that was confirmed by city planning that she and Sean Abreu co-sponsored. Yeah. I would guess they also voted for it.
Yes, for sure. That is correct. Thank you. I'll be here. I have some information. I'll try my best to answer it as best as I can. I'm not too familiar with the plan. With the legislation, but I'll try my best to answer the questions if you guys have any. And of course, when you can always follow up and I'll make sure to get answers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Osi.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry about the background noise. I don't know if, I'm sorry, I was late to the meeting. If you guys mentioned the SMIA that was created in the 90s, I believe, which is the Significant Maritime Industrial Areas. And this was created to concentrate industrial areas and later on proven to be mistakes because it was mainly situated in area of low-income New York City residents. So did you look into that, and what are you trying to achieve with that program?
I'm not familiar with that plan. I think we can definitely get back to you on that and check in with Ally and I, just to clarify, we're the Manhattan office liaison. So we haven't been engaged in the research side of this, but we can definitely relay that question to that team and get back to you. I know that, you know, a piece of this is looking at industrial areas and sort of their conflicts with residential areas and commercial areas, you know, thinking about where we can make corrections and thinking about like the productivity of certain industrial areas and so on. So, but we can follow up with you all.
Great. Indiana, is that an old hand or a new hand?
It's a new hand.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. My question was actually for Jamila. I know you mentioned that your knowledge of this is limited, but it would be great to hear from you guys, like what the motivation was, so that we also can have that in the back of our minds once we're looking at the draft program that is going to be released in July. Like, what were the goals that the council member was hoping to achieve with the legislation and the study?
Hi, Jamila, you still with us? Yes, you are. Hi, Jamila? I still.
Sorry, just trying to move to a quiet space.
Okay.
Multitasking today. Sorry about that. Okay, what was the question? I'm sorry.
The question was, could you give us some, background? What was the thinking? What was the intent of the council when they crafted this local law?
That is a great question. What I can say is that what was explained to me, like I said, I'm not too familiar with the legislation because I wasn't in the room, so to speak, when it came to the discussion. But I know it is a stepping stone into creating a plan that would eventually obviously benefit the community. I think our community might not be affected heavily compared to others from what was explained to me. But like I said, I'll definitely get more answers and get back to you guys regarding this bill. The local law, sorry.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate that. Anything further for city planning? If not, could you restate the date of the upcoming event for this planning, New York City Industrial Plan?
It's actually not quite set yet, but it's going to be in April. And as soon as we know the date, we will let you know.
Okay, so we look forward to that. We're in early March, so we have some time to get the word out. Indiana, is that
a new one? Sorry, it is a question for city planning. I was just curious if somebody could please speak to any post City of Yes engagement that the committee may expect. I know that, some of the changes and things like that. I don't know, like, is there rulemaking that's happening right now? Is there any kind of like post-passage update that we can expect, at least one? Any kind of, follow-up that the committee can expect?
which of the three City of Yes are
The
you?
housing, City of Yes for housing. Really, any of them, but specifically housing is what I'm most interested in at the moment.
City planning?
Yeah, we did brief, I believe we did a presentation in December on that compared what city planning had initially proposed versus what the council approved or didn't approve, a broad overview highlighting the changes between proposed and actual. But what type of, tell me more about what you're looking for in terms of information or resources, and I'd be happy to connect to you.
Thanks. I mean, I'm just thinking a little bit like, is there going to be some sort of tracking of how many of the let's say like for buildings that had applications that were pending, that you guys had kind of flagged for them that if City of Yes passed, they might be able to amend their proposed building in a in a specific way. Like, is there going to be any sort of reporting on how many buildings were impacted by that, or is there going to be reporting, any kind of reporting at all, or updates to the board? Maybe not, but I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So I know that we in our office have encountered some projects where the applicant is looking to take advantage of some of the zoning flexibility that was, provided by City of Yes. And it was passed at a point in their application process where they could change it to either take advantage of design flexibility or higher FARs. Let me see if that information is something I could obtain, but anecdotally, I will say there are some people who've who have changed their proposals based on the new legislation, and those are all, because they're through our office, most of them would be going through ULURP. But as far as of right developments, I don't have any information on that.
Just to build on Indiana's question, I mean, we were presented with and passed resolutions to address 3 City of Yes text amendments, for, I think it was sustainability, for economic opportunity, and then for housing opportunity, and not for next month, because obviously it will take time to pull together, but it'd be interesting to see what, at least to date, is the result, the impact of those zoning text amendments, not necessarily in Washington Heights and Inwood, but are there projects, elsewhere in Manhattan or throughout the city that have taken advantage of changes and are doing things for sustainability that they could not do prior to the change? Are there, enhanced business opportunities that are being pursued that heretofore could not be pursued? And in terms of housing, are there, changes to proposed developments that are, leveraging, taking advantage of things that are now doable that were not doable under the prior zoning? So, I mean, that's maybe for several months down the road to pull together the information, but we are presented with things, we voted them, and the question is, okay, what's the net result of all of this? And because there was a lot of work on your part, I'm sure, to get these zoning text amendments put together, they're passed, what's the result of this work?
And hi everyone, it's Jose here. Our office is looking into this, not just the Manhattan office, but at the DCP level. One thing I want to say, so there is going to be somehow, it's going to be extremely hard to get that data one-to-one, given that most of projects that are either revising their applications or revising their projects were not in the filing or drafting stage. So technically they were not filed with the department, and even up to filing, they will have to comply with the existing rules. And what we're doing right now at the moment is kind of noting some of the projects that were at the almost file and use stage, and they had decided to drop some applications or drop the project altogether because they can't go and move forward with an as-of-right auction. And that, our general counsel is now discussing in terms of like how much of that information is publicly available, and being able to highlight that also, one, as a win, but also we wanted to make it a little more data specific rather than anecdotal. We are providing we're providing our executive office with information that we have, but we'll follow up on this, and I think it's something that we keep hearing about in the future. So noted.
Well, I mean, the extent to which we have questions, we'll be sure to send them to you as you've requested in chat.
And also, I just finally pasted the transcript of the hearing for the introduction. If people are curious of what was discussed by each council member, you can take a look at the transcript. It's quite extensive.
Anything that you shared with us via chat, if you could email that to me, I'd appreciate it, because once this meeting ends, the chat disappears. It's not saved.
Gotcha.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much. Anything else for city planning? If not, we thank you for the briefing. We look forward to notification when the meeting is set in April, and receiving a copy of the presentation given tonight so that we can share it with other committees and they'll have it for their reference. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
The next item on the agenda, and this is something that some of the committee members we were discussing before the meeting began, is to look at sort of passive house and energy efficient windows, and to walk us through that. We have a representative from Intus Windows, and that's Sam Kinzel, I believe it is. And Sam is a certified passive house trade person. But Sam, I will let you introduce yourself and the company, and then walk us through, some of the, I guess, the basics of passive house, what it is, and, passive house and energy efficient windows. And this is coming from the perspective of, at land use, we are often presented with, redevelopment projects or renovation projects. And, while we are looking at the zoning and land use issues, we're also saying, well, how is the building addressing issues of energy efficiency? And we want to know, what are some of the good questions to ask, but also what is available in the industry, to ask for something that is overly expensive, that is not, financially feasible, is one thing, but to understand that these are the things that are readily available. These are the good design and construction practices, and are the projects that are being proposed in our community, are they following those practices? So Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wayne. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's great to listen in and see how how all of this is discussed. This is, again, my first time being in a meeting like this, and it's a really cool opportunity. And like you mentioned, Wayne, my name's Sam Kinzel. I've been a certified passive house tradesperson for going on 6 years, a lot of experience in this field. And I also want to let everybody know we have a strong presence in not only your neighborhood, but really all of New York City, and I would say even especially northern or the north part of Manhattan here. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is introducing passive house to everybody. And you also have to consider this from my perspective. Typically, I'm presenting to, again, architects, contractors, and owner developers, but I'll certainly keep in mind some of the aforementioned points that you want me to focus on here, Wayne, as I go throughout. So a little bit about Intus as well. We've been in business for close to 20 years, and again, a lot of work in your area. Our whole goal here at Intus is to provide literally the highest performing product on the market. And I know it's cliche to hear things like that, but I'm gonna, as we go throughout today, prove it with data points. And passive house is incredibly important for reducing those carbon emissions throughout the planet. And I'll give you a great stat to kind of back this up before we jump into the presentation. All transportation put together globally, the cars we drive in, airplanes in the sky, cargo ships on the sea, account for about 20% of the carbon emissions. Buildings contribute twice that amount, 40%. And why things like passive house are so incredibly important, right? If we have a focus on passive house as we do, again, improving the energy efficiency of our transportation, we can certainly make a big dent in these CO2 emissions. So I'm going to go and share my screen and jump into it. And specifically what we're going to focus on today to everybody, what we do here at Intus is UPVC or polymer windows. And to give you a little background on that. Now, most of the time, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot, most projects or most buildings in New York City are using things like steel or an aluminum product or steel or aluminum frame. Now, unfortunately, that is the least performing type of material that you can use on a building. About 45% of heating and cooling loss from a building strives directly from your windows and doors. So if we want to improve, again, on the energy efficiency of our buildings and, of course, making interior air quality improve, and again, the surrounding area, reducing carbon emissions, passive house is going to be so incredibly important. And I'm going to talk about 5 core principles that everyone needs to keep in mind moving forward to make these buildings more energy efficient. So give you a little background on polymer windows. This is the most used material throughout Europe. So if any of you have ever had the chance to visit Europe, you might have encountered a polymer window previously. Now, how is polymer different than, say, like a vinyl or an aluminum window? Polymer is UPVC. That U indicates this material is completely unplasticized. So certainly much greener for the environment right off the bat. This product is non-toxic. It does not off-gas, say like something like a vinyl window, and it also has half the amount of embodied carbon as compared to something like an aluminum window. So when we're looking at commercial alternatives for fenestration, this is certainly going to be the most energy efficient product available on the market. Not only during manufacturing, also in recycling. And I know I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but it's important stuff to mention. You know, your typical vinyl window. Most people are under the assumption you can recycle that material. But because of those added plasticizers, many of which are red list items, it actually prevents people or anyone from being able to recycle vinyl. Polymer, however, you can recycle, and about a third of our product is recycled material already. And again, I don't mean to turn this into a product demonstration. I really just want to drive home the energy efficient advantage of something like a polymer or UPVC window than, again, something like aluminum or a vinyl product. And as you've probably seen what I have pulled open, just to show everybody, like I said, strong presence in your neighborhoods in Washington Heights and Inwood, and of course around New York City in general. But let me get rid of this. And, you know, I have a presentation here, and this is typically geared towards an AIA accredited lunch and learn, but you may see me kind of skip around here, everybody, just to hit on the pertinent information. And I don't want to take up a full, hour of your time here. So you'll see me kind of bounce around here a little bit. Now, this is an example of a passive house project we have in Corona, New York. And many of the case studies that we're going to be looking at today, everybody, are located, again, in New York City. So let me kind of skip ahead. I've already introduced myself here. My name is Sam Kinsel. Again, been a certified passive house tradesperson for about 6 years. But what are we going to be focusing on in this kind of condensed version of our passive house presentation? We're first going to talk about where the passive house movement began. So just a very brief history and talk about why it was introduced and kind of the reasoning behind it. We're then going to talk about really the fenestration side. And again, it sounds like maybe I'm trying to push a product here, but like I told you earlier, 45% of that heating and cooling loss happens through your windows and doors. So it's going to be one of the 5 core principles of passive house is to have very high energy efficient fenestration. And again, when I say fenestration, I'm referring to windows and doors. We're then going to talk about the couple different standards that are out there. There's FIAS, which is the United States-based standard, and then there's PHI. That is going to be the original, but that is located in Europe. They have different climate zones, and I'll get into this as we cover the presentation. We're then, again, going to spend a lot of time on those 5 core principles, and I think that's going to be the best for you to make sure you're understanding what you need to see to make a building energy efficient. Because not only are these 5 core principles the principles of passive house, but it's the 5 key ingredients to, again, reducing carbon emissions on every single building that you're going to look at, regardless if it's pursuing passive house or any type of high energy efficient building standard. So to kick things off, we're going to rewind time here a little bit, okay? And we're first going to talk about the development of homes, houses, and buildings in general. And we're going to start briefly back in the 19th century. Now, let's think again how construction is done. Walls are certainly pretty thin right back in the 19th century. If you're lucky to have windows, they're going to be monolithic, right? Meaning a single pane of glass. This is before double or triple pane, right? And when it comes down to the heat source for a building in the 19th century, well, it's the fireplace, and that's it, right? This is before boilers, furnaces, and certainly air conditioning. And our small friend, they're bundled up as much as they physically can. Now, moving into the 20th century, the ethos was how do we provide a comfortable interior environment year-round? Now, over the years, we've chipped away at improving the materials that we use, and of course the techniques as well. But the major implementation we saw moving into the 20th century was the introduction of those large mechanical systems, heating, cooling, HVAC, etc. And you can see a lot going on behind those walls now. And this implementation was huge in improving comfort. You could literally turn a dial within a degree of your desired temperature. I think my wife and I are still trying to decide what that perfect desired temperature is, which makes for some good conversations, but that's a moot point. But we have to take a step back and think about cause and effect. Yes, we've solved the problem of creating a comfortable living environment, But what is that unintended side effect? Well, as I told you at the beginning, with hindsight at our disposal, we now know that 40% of all carbon emissions are directly stemming back to our buildings. And again, why something like Local Law 97 is so incredibly important. So, what are today's challenges moving into the 20th century? It's not necessarily how do we deliver a comfortable interior environment. We all know we have that down pat. Today's question, how do we do so in a more effective and sustainable way? And just as importantly, how do we do so in a cost-effective way? Because I could certainly tell you about the highest performing materials on the market, but if it doesn't fit into the budget, because it's going to cost so much more, well, it's pie in the sky, right? So fast forward to today. Increased competition in this space. Changing code requirements is a great example. Public funds, tax abatements, rising energy costs, really all of these factors combined have made Passive House much more accessible and much more popular as well. And I'll give everybody a great example as I move on. The city of Boston. You, of course, have your base code. Stretch Code in Boston now is achieving passive certification, and they're the first city in the country to make this a part of a code requirement. So it is only a matter of time until, again, a lot of our larger cities, again, where I'm located here in Chicago or you in New York City, start to see this implementation. Okay, now I'm just going to keep a very brief background here on Passive House. But Passive House is not actually a new building standard. It's actually been around since the early 1970s. And something happened in the early 1970s that sent the United States into an energy crisis, a little thing called the oil embargo of 1973. Now, this quadrupled oil prices, again, sent the United States into an energy crisis. And this is where we saw the United States and Canada begin to research how to increase the thermal performance of homes, houses, and buildings and reduce that need on, say, fossil fuels. So one of the first prototypes we saw built was the Saskatchewan Conservation House of 1977. But by the 1980s, the United States started to pivot a little bit on that focus on energy efficiency. And this is where we saw Europe really define this standard that we're going to be focusing on today. And specifically Germany, really, again, refining Passive House, again, to what we're going to be discussing over the next several slides. So probably asking yourself so far, sounds great, but what is actually Passive House? So let's get into that part, because I'm sure some here, this might be your first time hearing about it. So I'm going to start with the textbook definition and we'll start building on this. Passive House is a voluntary standard for energy efficiency, which is going to reduce that building's ecological footprint. Now the result, and this is important, it is going to result in a high energy efficient building that's going to require very little energy for both heating and cooling. And I'll give you a great stat here in a second to back that up. However, there's some other things that passive projects really try to do. Increase interior air quality and interior comfort levels as well. So you see a little stat on the right-hand side there. If you can hit the Passive House standard, typically you're looking at a 75 to a 90% reduction on that building's overall energy use and demand. And let that sink in. 75 to 90% reduction. Imagine how big of an impact if this was made, say a requirement in New York City for certain size buildings to be able to go after and achieve this standard. And, for what it's worth, everybody, Passive House is now not some far off conceptual program like it was maybe 20 years ago. The average ROI for investors is 5 years. So again, this is not something that's above and beyond, and it's going to cost an order of magnitude to build. Typically what we're looking at is maybe 3 to 5% extra. And again, that ROI within 5 years. So this is very doable for your owner developers and architects that you are speaking to. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead here. And I'm going to jump ahead to the 5 core principles. This is what you're going to want to see on every building for energy efficiency, regardless, again, if it's going after Passive House or not. Now, the number one most important principle for Passive House is using the right thermal insulation. And I'll give you a great example. There's a company in New York City called Dextal. Now, Dextal retrofits exterior skins of buildings, where you can take an old brick building, retrofit EIFS, including windows right over the current existing skin of the building, and dramatically increase the thermal performance of the building once again. So there's a lot of companies out there doing very similar things. But essentially, why is this?
You might want to explain for folks what EIFS is.
EIFS is like an exterior insulation, everybody. So think of it like an insulated panel with some type of facade element over the top. Again, adding that exterior insulation to the exterior of the building rather than maybe between your brick and your drywall, for example. So a very easy way to, again, retrofit an older building and make it much more energy efficient without, again, having to tear down that brick that's currently existing. Thank you for jumping in, Wayne. So think of it like this, everybody. Passive House, you're essentially designing the cooler that you're bringing your favorite beverages to the shore in the summer, or the thermos that you're carrying your coffee to in the middle of winter. You're trying to protect this interior space from any type of dramatic temperature swing on either end of the spectrum. So with the right thermal insulation, you're going to allow every other part of that building to actually work and operate at its max potential. Okay? So, where you are located, I would really push everybody to be more focused on U values, and I'll explain what a U value is. So U value is one of the core principles of a window. You can think of U value like insulation. Now, we both know it gets a little cold where we're both at, right? So insulation is going to be crucial, and U values are really going to be the first place you should look. Now, for a passive building, the U value requirement is about a 0.14 U value. Now I'm going to translate that into R values, which again, R values are insulation. That's about an R7, okay? So that's going to be above and beyond any type of aluminum or steel window could provide. And I guess for reference, everybody, E designated zone requirements is a 0.3 U value. So this passive house is double the code requirement on energy performance, right? A 0.14 versus a 0.3 respectively. So you're going to need, again, to see a lot of exterior insulation. And again, think of it kind of like a Yeti cooler, right? You're protecting that interior space from any type of dramatic temperature swing on either end of the spectrum. Now, this principle is extremely important, and I would argue it's just as important as the first. Making sure these buildings are extremely airtight. Now, it's going to be a little easier on a new construction project, a little more challenging on, again, an existing building. So essentially on a passive project, everybody, every single spot that is common to see air leaks needs to be addressed, whether it's puncture points in your envelope. Maybe it's, again, over-insulating your floor slab to wall connections, preventing against thermal bridging happening in that. Maybe a good example of that, maybe we stayed or we go by a patio and the floor gets very, very cold. Well, that is thermal bridging happening from the outside coming to the inside. And unfortunately, one of the biggest puncture points or biggest areas on your envelope that air is going to creep in is around your windows and doors, okay? And again, like I keep saying, why this is such an important principle, think of it like this. Let's say it's last week, and I think somebody mentioned earlier that you maybe had to walk. So let's pretend that we had to walk to lunch or walk to work in a 20-degree day, all right? I know everybody's going to break out your warm coats. It doesn't matter what that brand is or what that material is, whether it's a Carhartt coat or a Canada Goose coat. If you walk around with that coat unzipped, are you allowing it to work at its max potential? Of course not. Same thing happening with your building envelope. This is very, very crucial, everybody. And I'll tie another concept in. Sound attenuation, which is another requirement in those E-designated zones, right? Nobody wants to be woken up by honking horns, busy traffic, and elevator railway, right? So this is incredibly important. Good thing to remember. Where the air goes, the sound goes. So typically when you're seeing a building that's having a lot of air leaks, you're also going to have a lot of noise traveling in, which of course is going to affect stress levels, right? Is it harder or easier to sleep when there's a lot of exterior noise? So these kind of go hand in hand. And I'll jump to the next principle here. Thermal bridge free design. And this is going to be really something that everyone should remember from your side when you're looking at different building materials. Metal window frames are the least performing products available on the market. And that window that may be behind you may probably even be metal. And I'm sure you could probably feel a little draft. And if you put your hand near that frame, you could probably feel it even be a little cold. So there's not a big secret here. You're separating the inside from the outside with metal. When that happens, you're getting more thermal bridging. And once again, like I told you, about 45% of that heating and cooling loss coming from those windows and doors. And I think that thermal imaging slide really backs it up, everybody. So the point I want to get across here, if your goal is energy efficient, avoid metal framed products, okay? And historically, you're doing a tall building. You have a large window. typically your only option is aluminum. However, polymer has the same ratings as an aluminum window structurally. So we can do window wall, we can do storefronts, we can do ribbon window, we can do large punched openings. My point in bringing this up is that you now also have a commercial alternative that can do the same sizes as an aluminum window, but offer much better thermal performance. Now, I may be too far into the weeds here, but take your typical aluminum window. There's something called a thermal break that is an aluminum window. It's essentially a non-metal piece that sits in the middle of that window frame. The idea is to break up the thermal bridging, right? Now, all we have done with polymer is essentially inverse that concept. And again, why this is so popularly used in Europe, where certainly energy efficiency has certainly much more of a focus, right? We're essentially burying a conductive material, because our window frames are steel reinforced, and wrapping it in one big thermal break. And why we can do the same sizing, but offer an order of magnitude greater thermal performance, once again reducing those carbon emissions. Okay, I don't want to nerd out here too much on window jargon and dive into these thermal imaging charts. However, I think this will really just kind of maybe put a ribbon on what I was saying, okay? Now, on this slide, and you know what, I think this might actually be good to go over, because this will really show you why you should try to avoid metal products, okay? So, on this slide, we have the same piece of glass, and all we've done is swap between a polymer and an aluminum frame, and we're looking at the performance delta, right? What's the difference on performance? Same glass, but how big of an impact that frame makes. I'll keep this simple. Our baseline for the performance is a 0.25 U value. And everybody, the lower the U value, the better, okay? Now, we put a polymer frame on that glass, and we go to a 2.6 U value from a 2.5, meaning there's little change. We then put an aluminum frame on that same piece of glass, and we see that value double in the wrong direction, okay? So same glass, but a different frame, a 0.26 versus a 0.46, meaning when you add that aluminum frame once again, you drop the overall performance of that window by 2x. Once again, thermal bridging needs to be avoided at all costs. It's so important. I guess I'll go back a little bit. Now, one other thing I want to mention. Like I said earlier, 0.14 is typically going to be what you want to look for on a passive window. Okay, again, that's U value. U value is pertaining to insulation. And to brag a little bit, we are actually on New York City's largest passive building. It's called Sendero Verde, if anyone wants to check it out. It's a 20-story building in Manhattan, but pardon me, I don't remember offhand exactly where it's located, and I can always get that to you as well. But that project pursued the European standard at a 0.12 full unit U value, essentially meaning that you have a window at an R10, which is essentially unheard of, everybody. That is a realm that very few manufacturers can go. And hopefully I'm driving home the point at this point, insulation so crucial to reducing utility cost. All right, I'll kind of skip ahead here, everybody. I'll keep this kind of brief. Ventilating a passive project. Again, my expertise is more on the Windows side, but there's a couple different ways to ventilate a passive project. It's a little bit different. So there's two main ways. An ERV, it is an energy recovery ventilator system, or an HRV, heat recovery ventilator system. So for you, everybody, you're going to want to see, again, an energy recovery ventilator system on these passive buildings. And maybe I'm probably only speaking to Wayne at this point because I know he has a little background in architecture. But again, for what it's worth, that's probably going to be what you want to look at, avoiding more of your basic fossil fuel units. And, one thing I want to put on your radar too, I think you've probably seen this as well, but electric heat pump integration. We actually have won a huge contract with NYCHA. We're going to be replacing a 5-figure amount, so literally tens of thousands of windows throughout New York City, and including an electric heat pump that you can vent right through our window system. And again, it's a great way to reduce those fossil fuel units and once again, reduce your carbon emissions. I know I'm throwing a whole lot at you, everybody. Is there any questions I can address? I won't go too much farther into this, but those are really the 5 core principles of Passive House.
So thank you for the presentation.
Yeah,
and I hope you can also present to the health and environment, since health and environment is probably will be very interested in that presentation. A question about the material of windows. I think when you mentioned that maybe PVC is not legal material to use in New York City.
But polymer isn't, well, good.
Okay, so no, I want him to tell us, is PVC window material is legal to use in New York City?
It is, well, so just to draw a line, your typical vinyl window, that is a PVC window. Polymer is UPVC. That U indicating our material is unplasticized. So none of those nasty things that, essentially that you're referring to, right? Lead additives, phthalates, BPA, none of that is, again, in a polymer window. So certainly much more eco-friendly on the manufacturing side. Once again, it's also a non-toxic material, has half the amount of embodied carbon as compared to something like aluminum. And to give you a peace of mind, we have about 200 projects in New York City.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make that distinction between the polymer and the PVC, because what we were discussing this at a prior meeting, in years past, there have been issues with, PVC building products, and if there is a fire, which happens, the PVC outgasses stuff that is toxic.
Yes, very important.
The other question is, and I know that there were some roofing materials where the foam was PVC or whatever, and they were sensitive to UV, radiation and to sunlight, which is problematic because they're outside the building and will always be subject to UV ventilation and sunlight. So how does polymer windows, how does that material react to sunlight and to UV radiation?
Great question. I'm first going to address the fire comment. Give you a peace of mind, everybody. Unlike a vinyl window, polymer is non-combustible. It's self-extinguishing. So to be very specific, this can pass something called the ASTME 84. It's a flame, smoke, and spread test for mid and high-rise buildings. Essentially, this is classified the same way as any other, like an aluminum window, essentially, where it's non-combustible, and you're not going to get that off-gassing as well. So to answer your question about UV, to my knowledge, there is no type of off-gassing that occurs. And maybe to back that up too, we don't have any of those, again, those nasty chemicals that you're typically going to find in a vinyl window. Not only that, our product does have an unplasticized film that's also baked on, which is going to prevent against any type of deterioration of that frame over time. It actually has a 20-year warranty, so even outlasting something like an aluminum window too. So a little hard for me to answer that directly, Wayne, but hopefully that kind of helps.
Yes. And this project you're showing, Santiago Verde, in East Harlem. I know of the architectural firm, and I also know of the developer as well. And this is affordable housing. And so the other question is how the cost of the polymer window compares to the cost of a thermally broken aluminum frame window.
Another great question, Wayne. And yes, this is affordable housing. And look, everybody, I think there's a huge argument for passive house and affordable housing. I'll tell you why. Because, I can drive into Chicago in the middle of winter and see old utilitarian brick structures that we've all kind of come to know as affordable housing with the windows wide open on the top floors because of that stacking effect of the boiler over time. So why is this important? Well, at the end of the day, who are people in these affordable housing developments? Literally the highest need individuals. And if we're sticking them with a couple $100 a month utility bill because the building was built poorly, or again, the windows leak like a sieve, or if they're not going to pay those utility bills, who would? The taxpayers. So I think there's a really strong monetary argument to reduce the load. Once again, whether it's the occupants or the taxpayers footing those utility bills. And moreover, if you don't want a monetary argument, it's clearly more green for the environment. Now, your question, Wayne, how does this compare against something like an aluminum window? Great news. Typically about 30 to 40% less. We start at $18 a square foot. And why I told you at the beginning, this is not only a very energy efficient product, but it's also very cost effective as well. So this is going to be, and just to kind of back up a little bit, this is a 20-story building, everybody. Typically, you're only going to see an aluminum window because structurally, that's the only product that could be on a building like this until polymer was introduced. So not only is it, again, an order of magnitude more energy efficient, it's also about 30 to 40% less on cost.
Yeah, the cost is an important consideration, particularly if we're looking at affordable housing. And in New York City, given the cost of housing and incomes, everything needs to be affordable housing. Because, typically, if affordable housing, if it's getting subsidy dollars from the city or the state or grant funds, there's often not a willingness to spend more money on the first cost, even if it's going to yield a building with with systems that have a longer life or perform better. It's like, this is the cost per square foot that our program allows. And that's that. So as long as, polymer not only performs better than, the aluminum windows, but also is cost competitive or less, the argument can be made. And I've, dealt with some affordable housing developments over the years, and even with healthcare, there are arguments that can be made for spending more, but you often can't get the people who control the budgets to agree to spend more upfront.
Of course. So I think this is a welcome change, right? Because again, it will yield cost savings, which obviously going to be a great argument to any type of owner developer. And another point I haven't mentioned is the lifespan is actually even longer than an aluminum window. So there's not going to be a need after 10 years like a vinyl window to replace this. A polymer window has a 50-year lifespan, and it can actually be recycled up to 7 times after its use life, same to same recycling as well. And that's typically, not something an aluminum window can tout. And maybe just another quick fun fact here against aluminum. Aluminum windows typically say they have a 40-year lifespan. It takes an aluminum window 40 years to offset its carbon emissions. Polymer, it takes under 20. So again, just another example on how this can be more energy efficient.
And I see a hand from Indiana, but while I'm, sort of peppering you with questions,
I love it.
Is, in New York City, we have something like 900,000 existing buildings, pushing 1 million. So if we're doing retrofits in historic buildings that are subject to landmarks review and approval, can your company, or in general, can the polymer windows match the profiles that a historic building might need in order to do a retrofit?
Great question, Wayne. I believe we can get very, very close. I've seen certain municipalities accept it, some haven't. And it really just comes down to the fact that a lot of historic committees really like that look of a classic steel window, which is a very unique shape. But once again, unfortunately, it's the least type of high performing material on the market. So there is something that kind of has to be addressed in the sense that, yes, we certainly want to keep that aesthetic. We want to keep that historic landmark, but also at the same time, technology has certainly progressed to where we do need to look at maybe alternate materials. But I can certainly give you some examples on how we could get a very close aesthetic to either historic or an industrial building. We do a lot of retrofits in that scope of work.
Indiana?
Thank you. I had 3 questions, 2 of which you have already addressed. So thank you very much, Wayne, for your follow-up questions. My final question was just about availability. If something happens in a building, a window breaks, or I don't know, for whatever reason, you need to replace these windows, are they as easily available in terms of time? Let's say, like if I'm a building owner, I'm in charge of the building, something happens and I need to replace windows. Are they quick to, like, can you get replacements quickly? I don't know really how to word this question. I'm sorry, but like, is that something that you have to like special order and there's a wait period, or, should you have backups?
Yeah. A lot of different ways to approach it, India, and it's a great question. So, one thing that I always push for building owners is to have something called attic stock, which is kind of common sizing or common replacements for a building. Number 2, something breaks and you have to put something in order. We can work with any type of local glazing supplier to get glass in that window, to either keep that glass permanently. We use Guardian glazing, which is very common glass type, or we could, again, provide that custom IGU, and typically that takes us about 3 to 4 weeks. So we have some solutions in the meantime, but overall, typically it takes us about 3 to 4 weeks to develop and custom cut an IGU. But like I said, we're going to be with you and help you make sure you actually get a like alternative in that window time being. One other important thing to mention, though, you can install and replace glass with our product from the inside. a lot of buildings, or excuse me, a lot of windows like aluminum, you need to replace from the exterior, which certainly becomes very complicated, right? You have to swing the exterior of a building, that involves permits, right? Special approvals, etc. Where a polymer window, you could replace all of that glazing from the inside. So hopefully that touches on your question.
You might want to explain what is an IGU.
Thank you, Wade. I'm so used to just talking with architects all day, I forget. IGU is insulated glass unit. Fancy way of saying the glass itself. And to draw a line, like an aluminum window would use something called float glass. Float glass is not as energy efficient as an IGU. So most likely if you have, maybe you've been into, someone's home, that's going to be like an IGU. Or if you see like a big glassy structure, that's typically float glass. Essentially, it does not have an air gap. Again, I'm sorry if I'm putting everyone to sleep with again, being a window dork here, but essentially IGUs are much more energy efficient than like a float glass counterpart.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
Stylistically, it looks like there are all these retrofits from these pictures and other ones I've seen where there's sort of like boxes of color. Is that just happen to be where you're working on building stylistically, or does something about what you do also involve the color?
How do you mean by color, if you don't mind me asking?
Seen a lot. Well, there's a two-tone building, but I've seen sort of, which I imagine is the retrofitting, multicolor boxes over buildings in New York where they are retrofitted. And it always seems like it's also a very different look than the building had originally when it was a homogeneous, whatever, brick surface.
Yeah, so
incidence of style now, or is that related to what you do?
it's a little bit of both. So I would say most of the time when you see those boxes, I think you're referring to actually what we talked about earlier, that ephes, right? It's going to be an insulated panel that they're going to reskin a building on. So there's a couple different parts to it. You could go after that more historic look, or maybe that those kind of color palettes, if you will. But I also think a lot of people take the opportunity to kind of maybe try to create a more vibrant structure when they have that capability, because you can source so many different colors through that ephes. And I'm actually going to bring something open that I think would benefit everyone to look into, especially on retrofits. Again, this company called Dextal. And I think is this kind of what you were saying with those like kind of colored boxes essentially on the exterior of a building?
Yeah, they're usually more extreme than that, but yes.
So let me pull something up here. And this company is actually based, this is probably exactly what you're talking about right here. A little something like this. On the left-hand side there. Which is
a function of new construction or resurfacing old buildings, and that's the aesthetic that the architect is going with, but I don't know if that's driven by the window.
It's typically not driven by the window, at least I would say from our side.
Well,
and I was just trying to find some examples, kind of what we're referencing, and essentially this company, again, is providing those insulated panels that are going to fit right over a brick building. And there's a great example on their website that I'm trying to find that I think explains what I'm trying to get across here. Essentially, they're going to set up like a track system on the exterior of a building.
But that is currently being done on a building in our
right there.
I believe it's a senior citizens building on Amsterdam. But a polymer window need not be associated, if I'm hearing you correct, it need not be associated with the recladding of an exterior of the building in that way. It's just that in many cases, if you're going to do that recladding, you're also going to do a more energy efficient window.
Exactly.
Polymer is the way to go as opposed to a metal one, because then you're kind of defeating the purpose of doing this more efficient skin and a less efficient window.
Couldn't said it better myself. You're spot on.
I've seen a building.
Who was?
No, I've seen a building that they did something like that, which is like pretty cool.
Was that the one in Amsterdam or?
No. This was like, it's like one that you could see on the Cross Bronx, because I think it's like a project building. It used to like look like brick and all stuff, and they did something like that, which made the building look significantly
We did.
different, yeah.
And I think that's one of the examples of, it might be one of the things that is now doable because of City of Yes for sustainability, because the code before only allowed you to project a certain number of inches beyond the face, and given the thickness of insulation, the panels were too big. But that dimension was modified under City of Yes for sustainability. So now you can do it. But I'm not certain if that's what's driving, like the one in Amsterdam and the one in the Bronx.
So related to that, that would be one of my questions. How is the Department of Finance look at that? Because you add more area to your building, which your taxes will be calculated. No, it's
No,
something to think about.
I don't know.
I'm not saying that, I'm not asking you specifically on this. I'm just saying in general, how they're looking at that, because my understanding, a little bit before local law 97, the Department of Finance will allow, if you have like 8 inches additional material or cladding coming on your building, only 1.5 or 2 inches need to be insulation material, and you will get a credit on this in the square footage of your building. Because they calculated the how do you explain it? Like the outer.
The FAR, it's the building
Okay,
area.
the building, right. So how do Department of Finance look at that? Which sometimes will determine if a building will, a co-op or a condo will do or will not do a project like this.
Yeah, I think that's addressed in the materials we got when we were looking at City of Yes for sustainability. We can check, because that was one of the issues. You had conflicting city regulations where, one wants you to do something for the energy efficiency, and the other one is going to punish you by charging you for doing it.
Right.
Jim?
It's a great point.
Thank you. This issue of cladding actually came up, as Wayne mentioned, maybe with the City of Yes, and I think there was an even earlier zoning thing where the city wants to encourage this cladding for insulation purposes. And the key, of course, I was looking at the website of the product that was just mentioned. The key, of course, is that this cladding. The other piece of it is, in terms of zoning, it does not increase the size of the building because the interior size doesn't change. And I think the zoning change was specifically to make sure that didn't happen. But the whole thing is fireproof, because you may recall there was that horrible tragedy in England where the entire outside of a building, it was an entirely different substance. The interior of the cladding, which provided insulation, was in fact plastic that burned. And the product we just heard about, it's some kind of rock wool that doesn't burn at all. It's basically rock. But that's part of the key. And in this country, we actually understood this cladding problem better. But they had similar fires, you may remember, in the Middle East, in some of these big cities, where the whole side of the building would go up for exactly the same reason. So I just wanted to mention that.
Great point, Jim. I've heard of that same incident in England as well.
Yes, it made the news here in the
Grenfell Tower.
It was terrible.
Agreed.
Indiana?
Thank you. I have another very vague question, but I remember during some of the hearings about Local Law 97, one of the issues that was raised were birds were flying into the windows of the new buildings. And I didn't know if there were any considerations that we would need to have on our radar when evaluating that in this context. Is it reflective? Is it, problematic in that sense? Is it better? If you can speak to that.
Of course. Great question again, Indiana. So bird glass is something that we carry. We're certainly well aware that it is a code requirement in many parts of your city. I believe, if I'm kind of shooting off the hip here, but I believe it's any building or any floors of, I want to say it's either 3 or above or 7 above. I apologize for forgetting. However, there are a lot of different types of bird glass solutions. You have a frit option. So frit, which is essentially a dot that is adhered to the glass. There's an etch option, which is essentially a pattern that is etched into the glass itself. And then there's also a UV option, which is like a reflective coating. And I can pull out some examples on exactly how that bird glass would look too.
Yeah, well, let's not do that right now because we do need to get into another presentation, but
Okay,
you know,
I'm sorry.
it is something that does come up when we are discussing buildings and, you know, there are in fact different types of bird glass or, yeah.
Okay. And
Thank
Wayne, if I
you.
could just have 10 more seconds to recommend something for everybody. When you have a quick second, everybody, go to YouTube, type in Passive House in 90 seconds. I recommend this video to everybody. If you listen it at 1.5 times speed, it's Passive House in 60 seconds. And it's essentially a great summary of what I described to you, and certainly a little less long-winded than the way I described it to you as well. So if you're still kind of wondering what Passive House is, again, Passive House explained in 90 seconds. It is a great video to watch.
I think this is another project where I am less familiar with the developer, but I am familiar with Datner Architects. They do wonderful stuff in brick. But
Big
you know,
partner of ours.
we have you know, discussed Passive House and energy efficiency, and I'm so glad to have been able to get you to join us and to you know, share your knowledge with us. And as OC pointed out, there are other, we have a health and environment committee, and they may be less interested from a planning and design perspective, but the whole idea of having improved air quality, you know, might resonate with them. But also the fact that, you know, not getting into the weeds of it, but how the improved construction would lower, you know, energy bills for whether it's residential tenants or for, you know, institutional or commercial tenants. I mean, it will lower those bills. So there may in fact be other committees who would like to,
Yes.
you know, hear from you.
Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate that, Wayne. And if you could provide any contacts, I'd be happy to follow up with them and, you know, share any type of information they'd like to review.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, there are organizations, I'm thinking of the Historic Districts Council, which I mentioned the lead off of this, that deal, you know, throughout the city with not just individual buildings, but whole districts. And if you had the time to, you know, focus more specifically on what polymer windows, you know, can do or have done in buildings that are subject to review, whether it's by New York City landmarks or by state or by National Park Service, they might be interested in hosting something that's more focused with, you know, folks who are architects and contractors, but also folks who are, you know, in the preservation field and, you know, want to know how this can be used as a tool that would help and not hurt in maintaining historic buildings.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to summarize. And I certainly agree. If we can hit that same look, keep that same aesthetic they'd like to see, but also hit modern energy efficient requirements, I think it's a win-win.
Great. I thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you all, seriously.
Follow up with you more.
Yes.
But staying on the theme of sustainability and energy efficiency, we have another presentation, and I reached out to the New York City Accelerator Program that I'm working with in the context of being president of my co-op board. And they have put me in touch with a speaker from, I believe, the Mayor's Office of Environmental Justice, that is Say Sanchez Osorio. So, Say, you have the floor. Why don't you introduce yourself and sort of tell us a bit about the focus of your presentation on sustainability and energy efficiency.
Yeah, hi. Can you guys hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Great. Hi, Wayne. Nice to meet you all, and thanks for having me. My name is Sai. I'm a new policy advisor here at the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, working on our sustainable buildings team and helping to manage the city's accelerator program, which Wayne mentioned. He works within the capacity of this building. And so my sort of main focus of this presentation is to give you all an overview of the accelerator program, the services we offer, and hopefully be able to connect you all with more specific industry experts, such as Sam, who would be able to give you all a better, better specifications in regards to what to look for as you're evaluating proposals in Washington Heights and Inwood. So I can share my screen. I also do apologize. I only just realized that for some reason my emails to you all kept bouncing back. I'm not sure if it's issues with my city email, but I did have to hop off at 8:30, so I'll try to speed through this and hopefully I can take your questions via email if that's all right with you all. Cool. Okay, can you guys see my
Yes.
slide deck? Okay, let's see if this works. How's that look to you?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, thanks. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a new policy advisor here at the mayor's office. Glad to join you all virtually tonight. I don't live in Washington Heights, but it's my personal favorite neighborhood in New York. Accelerator has worked on or is working on over 2,500 decarbonization projects in the district to date, over 1,400 buildings. So there's some great decarbonization projects going on up there. So yeah, without further ado, so New York City, as we know, is on a pathway to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. 68% of the city's emissions come from buildings, and 90% of the city's buildings are expected to still be here by 2050, which means to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, we need to focus on reducing emissions from buildings. And as we know, the city has passed a suite of decarbonization policies, including the Climate Mobilization Act of 2019. And the city is supporting and leading programs like the Accelerator, which offers free technical assistance and fosters economic development as we work towards meeting the city's ambitious climate goals. And so I was going to do a refresher on some of the city's main local laws affecting new construction, but maybe it's good that I'm short on time, as I'm sure you all are very well aware on how these policies impact new construction. So I'll just speed ahead here. Oh, and I will highlight, there are some resources I'll share throughout, but just want to highlight this local law 97 specific primer that we have specifically for new constructions. I can include that in a follow-up, as I know you mentioned earlier that you lose the chat history after the meeting. So I'll include all of those in a follow-up email instead. All right, chugging along. All right, are you guys seeing the accelerator slide?
Yes.
Cool. So what is the Accelerator? It's a program started a couple of years ago to help building owners, property managers, developers, and other decision makers work toward carbon reduction goals in the city. The program's part of the city's long-term goals to help the market transform how our buildings operate and are built. And so a few things the program does is provide technical assistance to help buildings interpret their energy benchmarking and audit results, deliver advice to determine requirements, help meet local energy laws, and using those results from those discussions to decide which building upgrades to implement, ranging from smaller projects like lighting retrofits to installing new heating equipment or roof replacements. And also delivering general guidance on how to sequence and prioritize building upgrades and energy conservation measures, or ECMs, to providing RFI and RFP templates to solicit proposals from service providers and contractors, which is a big part of our program. And lastly, a really important part of the program, of course, is connecting building owners with applicable financial incentives and financial opportunities.
What is RFI and RFP?
So requests for proposals and requests for information. Sorry, thanks. Feel free to catch me on those acronyms. So I'll preface this slide by saying that due to some internal shifts in priorities here at the city, as we head into the first reporting year for Local Law 97, the Accelerator currently isn't necessarily prioritizing new building leads. That isn't to say that new buildings that reach out won't get the help that they need from Accelerator. This track just currently is the largest priority for the program. That being said, typically the services that the Accelerator program can provide for new buildings is assistance throughout all phases of a construction project, which can include change of use or conversions. An Accelerator is really here to help educate and inform new building owners and design professionals on future-proofing projects aligned with local laws, code, and efficiency, focusing on key building milestones. So really the idea here is the earlier the program can get involved, the better. And again, these laws are just the ones to really be thinking about in particular for new construction. Local Law 97 limits on the city's largest buildings, 154, phase out of fossil fuels, and 92 and 94 requiring renovations and new constructions to install green roofs or solar PV. And Accelerator is here to provide the technical support and local law compliance through primarily high-level plan review and identifying those ECMs recommended based on the building's specific needs. And so to help meet the city's ambitious climate goals, choosing passive house level design or stretch code can help building owners meet those requirements. And again, this all helps lower costs, emissions, consumptions. And so that's, I went through that very quickly. That's all sort of an overview of some things to highlight in terms of what our program offerings are, as well as just the service that we can provide in the event that construction project leads in your communications with them maybe express interest or confusion about how they might proceed with undertaking energy efficiency measures. I did jump on this request for our participation in your meeting a bit late, so I apologize, but what my understanding is that you all were looking for more specific information on what areas to focus on when evaluating proposals regarding retrofits. And while this, of course, will vary on a case-by-case basis, I want to just highlight the really thorough library of resources the Accelerator has on some specific retrofitting projects that I think will be helpful for you all to use as somewhat of a referencing guide, given that I'm sure the nature of the projects or the proposals that you review will be and are diverse. And so this little library here lives in the new buildings landing page on the Accelerator website. But I specifically want to highlight what we call our playbook on all electric buildings. It is somewhat high level, but fairly comprehensive on strategies buildings can and should be undertaking to decarbonize. Highly suggest looking at it if you haven't already. I'll be sure to include after. And you'll find I can move my screen around. You'll find sort of relevant starting information there on what to look for optimal building upgrades, envelope design, including passive house, which Sam gave a fantastic overview of. I know I learned a lot, as well as ventilation, etc. So hopefully some helpful city-backed resources to work from. And then I lastly just want to highlight the Accelerator Service Provider Program. Oh, goodness gracious. I'll do it like this if you guys don't mind. The Accelerator Service Provider Program, which you may or may not already be familiar with. I'm sure Wayne is. But we refer building owners and facility and property managers to applicable service providers to help them with implementing decarbonization strategies. And so these are industry and product experts covering services ranging from weatherization, building envelope, electrical changes, who could have more subject-specific information in terms of these questions you're all hoping to be able to formulate for construction proposals you're reviewing. I definitely suggest looking through our service provider page and offerings, and if any of these folks and their services stand out to you as you're reviewing proposals and it would be helpful to hear from a specific industry expert, please don't hesitate to reach out and I can connect you with our service program provider manager, who can hopefully then put you in touch with someone who can help as you're looking to flag what should be avoided, what's most efficient, what questions to be asking. And yeah, sorry, that was rapid fire. That's all I have for you guys today. We're really, really glad to make this connection between your committee in the accelerator. Hopefully we can be of further assistance over time. But if any questions came up for you all during this presentation, please do not hesitate to shoot me an email. I'll preface that by saying that I am a relatively new addition to the team. So most likely out of caution, I'll take your questions back to my team and hopefully be able to get back to you all as quickly as I can.
Well, thank you so much. And I know that your reference library is going to be a great resource, for us, because it gives us the opportunity to review that material at our leisure. If there's just one thing you could touch on briefly, because I realize you have to go, and I'm sorry that your emails weren't coming through, because I would have flipped you and Sam so that you could have had more time with us. But you've mentioned the stretch code on a couple of occasions. Can you just briefly tell us what the stretch code is?
The New York City stretch code?
Yes.
So that is just the city's, here, I can go back to that slide. Wait, I'm not sharing my screen anymore, am I?
Yes, you are.
Oh, I am?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, where? Ah, yes. So the stretch code, not to be confused with the NICEC, is voluntary. There's some confusion that we've noticed with buildings confusing the two. NICEC is mandatory and doesn't necessarily guarantee with
the Energy Conservation Code?
Yes, sorry, thank you. It's voluntary. It generally just broadens sort of requirements that building owners can use regarding ventilation, other building decarbonization techniques. And I believe someone in our office could take, if you guys have construction project managers who have specific questions relating to the stretch code, I'm happy to connect you with those. I'm not sure if that's something that's been coming up for you all.
No, it's just actually, I think you and Sam in your presentation may have mentioned it. So it's not something that has come up in discussion with us before. So I was just curious to get more information on it. And, once again, if you were to forward this presentation to me, we would have it as a reference. And so we could then go through it more slowly as well.
Absolutely, I can do that. I'm not sure if who my emails were bouncing back from. I can take a look, but it might have been
the office. I mean, Paola Garcia said she got your response, but I'm looking at my inbox and I don't see your emails. But if you send it to everyone, someone will get it.
Okay, amazing. I'll follow up tomorrow morning with the slide deck. A couple of the accelerator website, I feel like, can be tricky to navigate because there are so many pages. So I'll take a look and I'll gather some of the resources that I think would be most helpful for your committee. And yeah, I'll get that over to you guys in an email tomorrow morning.
Okay, Tracy?
This is super helpful, especially for new construction buildings and as a guide for us on CB12. Is there something similar for lay people who live in existing buildings for them to give them the language and about what they can do to sort of take to their building management to say, so they can have the language to upgrade their buildings, right? Like this is dope for us. However, I was just sort of looking as like, buildings should be doing green proofing and other things, but if I live in an older red stabilized building and I wanted to take something to my building management, do you have a slide deck? Because this is really looks like for prospective buildings for us. Is there something for lay people for existing buildings?
That's a great question, and a very relevant one. So, so the accelerator program has a few different tracks that we focus on. New buildings is just one of them. And so this year, as we're entering the first reporting period for Local Law 97, we're really focusing a lot on existing buildings. And so most of the external slide decks. I believe that the program has maybe might not be tailored towards communicating with lay people and how they can get in touch with their landlord or property managers. But we certainly have a lot of guidance and a lot of information that relates specifically to existing buildings.
I want to flip it. It's not about how they get in contact with their building management. It's the language they should be using when they contact their building management to advocate for upgrades.
What they should be asking for.
What they should be asking for. Is
Gotcha.
there a slide deck for what they should be asking for to upgrade their buildings to these new standards?
Gotcha. Yes. Okay. Helpful. Yes. I believe, yes, we have, I think, recently tweaked some of our language around existing buildings, but my temporary answer is yes. I will take a look at our internal documents and see if I can find one that.
Because that would be sexy for you to come back and give a presentation on what old buildings in the Heights should be doing to advocate for upgrades.
I was going to say you, but actually the New York City Accelerator did a presentation December of 2023 for the HDFC Coalition that wasn't as technical as this. And HDFC Coalition, you're dealing with typically rent stabilized buildings that have become corps or whatever. So that presentation, I think, would be more focused to, tenants, this is what you should ask for. And maybe that could be tweaked to address what Tracy is talking about, because that was really geared to the people who are the tenants of the building and what they needed to understand about, the 12 million local laws and
also a lot of, sorry, I just want to follow up, but a lot of what she's talking about is applicable now to those type of buildings.
Absolutely.
And just to make sure that it's all of these things are just being a little less tech heavy and a little bit more.
It's almost like if we had a good one pager.
Yeah.
We had Christina gave us a presentation at the Health and Environment Committee, I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, about all the existing local laws for existing buildings, not new build.
Mm-hmm.
More so, local law 8497, 87, yeah, 88 is coming up, all of those things. So, is Chris, maybe, I don't know, maybe Christina can make.
Christina, I think
I don't remember
was,
her last name, I'm sorry.
I think it might be a different Christina, because there was a Christina who was on for the prior presentation, but yeah. If we could check with who came to the Health and Environment, we can.
I can check that, but
Yeah.
anyone can call the accelerator and ask the question, yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question about basically whether the services you provide are discretionary, right? So assuming people come to you and they need help and they meet some sort of eligibility criteria that you may or may not have, are you going to help them, or is there some sort of prioritization happening about who receives the services that the accelerator provides?
I don't have a clear answer on that. We are currently prioritizing existing buildings. So for new leads that we're getting, as we're entering our 5th program year for this current version of the accelerator, that we just started this past December, and we have shifted to prioritizing existing building projects, as opposed to, we had like a neighborhood focus track, new buildings. So that is what I can speak to on prioritization there. We do have several account managers that work with building owners, so it isn't a matter of like time and resources. But yeah, I that is my temporary answer, but I can follow up with a meeting with our service provider program manager tomorrow, and I can ask her how they are currently prioritizing project leads.
And correct me if I'm mistaken, but your services are free to the building.
Correct.
Yes. Mhm.
All right.
Yes.
I know we've kept you longer than you were available.
No, it is all good. I'm sorry that there was that
Thank you so much.
miscommunication. But I'll follow up on those items, including the slide deck for existing buildings as well as your last question there. But if anything came up that wasn't addressed, please do not hesitate to shoot me an email. And yeah, I'll hopefully we'll keep in touch over the coming weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being available.
All right, great. Thanks so much, all. Have a good one.
So it is 8:50. Do we have any old business?
Yes, but I'm not, we should put it back on the agenda. A few months ago, we spoke about, having some sort of a list
And
that,
I'm waiting for folks to generate that list.
oh, I start generating it, but I didn't share it yet because I figured we should discuss it obviously at the meeting, and I'll share it via email, and we can all
Yeah.
add some stuff to it.
Yeah, that was the idea for folks to, I mean, someone should be the point, and I mean, maybe you should be the point, and folks can send their thoughts, the questions that we should ask to you so that we can then compile it and then
Right.
have it as a document we can discuss.
Okay, so,
You're volunteering to be the point person.
absolutely, I would love to.
I'm sorry.
Deadline-
What questions about what? So sorry.
We were, there was a discussion a couple months ago about the type of, or sort of a generic list of questions that, we should put together. So when we are presented with projects, for new construction or retrofit, the kind of things we should be asking.
I see. Okay, thank you.
And sort of coming out of that discussion as well, we also reached out and got, these presentations on passive house, so we better understand that, and the accelerator, so we better understand that. So are there other things that we should be, thinking about and having as questions when they come? And not every question will be applicable, but if we have a generic list, as projects done before us, we will make sure we touch upon them. So that was the list. Sounds good. Deadline for that. You want them in,
Deadline to
to
send
send to
me,
you, yes.
I don't know, it could be 2 days before the next meeting. Which we should put it on.
So let's say by the end of the month,
Correct.
by the end of March, get OC your comments so that we can have something to discuss at the April meeting.
Correct.
About that then.
And just to be crystal clear, it's what are the sort of uniform questions we'd be asking new construction, so we have
So developer can come back to us prepared to answer
the
the
sort of
question.
systemic, sort of, what are our systemic questions that we're asking for
Every
new buildings?
developer wants- yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Glossary of
is-
acronyms.
Is there any new business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
It is 8:52. Are we in agreement to adjourn?
We are.
We are adjourned at 8:52. Thank you all.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. And it might still be pouring rain. I don't know.
I want to say, since I'm extremely late, if I don't get credit for this meeting.